Welcome to the program. Supreme Court Judge Philip Tunoi now wants his case challenging the retirement ages spelled out in the Constitution adjourned until the outcome of the tribunal expected to be constituted to probe bribery allegations leveled against him. Through his lawyers, Justice Tunoi argues that the case in which he is likely seeking to be allowed to retire at the age of 74 in line with the old Constitution is in some ways likely to be affected by the tribunal. All right, we will speak to our reporter Francis Amimo later on to get more information on that case. Let's move on now. Former Kinango DCIO Veronica Gitahi and former police constable Issa Mzee, convicted of killing 14-year-old Kwekwe Mwandaza in Kwale, will spend 2 days in custody before they know their actual sentence on Monday. High Court Judge Martin Muya postponed the judgment pending scrutiny of mitigation presented before him and the compensation scheme pressed by the victims' lawyers. Haron Ndubi, representing Kwekwe's family, cited the Victims Protection Act 2014 that allows those aggrieved to seek compensation. Tension was palpable in the courtroom as friends and relatives of the two gathered to listen to the final determination. The late Kwekwe Mwandaza was killed in cold blood in August 22nd, 2014 when police stormed their home in search of a murder suspect. The case has continued to attract attention from several quarters, with some human rights organizations petitioning for its conclusive determination.
Passed in November 2014, a victim of crime, whether it is theft or injury or any type of crime, is entitled to be compensated for the loss incurred. And that law also, such loss includes expenses associated with the trial of that case. And this compensation is usually awarded after conviction of the accused person.
All right, let's now join our reporter Francis Ontomwa, who is in Mombasa. Francis, have you been able to speak to the family and friends of Kwekwe Mwandaza, and what's their feeling on the proceedings today?
Hello, good afternoon, Michelle Ngele. And yes, it has been a day that many were waiting to know which way this particular case was going to take. And the family actually left the court a bit disappointed because today they wanted to know how many years the two will have been sentenced, and this will perhaps ended this long wait that has characterized this case. This case has lasted for 2 years, you remember, since Kwekwe Mwandaza was killed. Well, today actually what transpired is actually a postponement of this determination, which will be made Monday by the High Court Judge Martin Muya, and this is explained by two facts. The defense actually tried to mitigate this particular sentence to try and make it, to try and plea for a pardon for the two suspects. Jared Magolo, the lawyer for the defense, was actually trying to express how the two were remorseful on this particular occurrence. They actually, in his own words, he said that they had reflected and they were completely rehabilitated and they needed to be pardoned of these two cases. Actually, he went ahead to give a bit of details about these two officers. He said that Veronica Gitahi was a single mother of 3 and was also diabetic, some of the reasons that he tried to give the court for the pardon. Issa Mzee is a father of 2 and his wife is not employed, some of the reasons that Jared Magolo tried to convince the court. The victim's lawyer, Haron Ndubi, was also categorical that they needed to compensate the family of Kwekwe Mwandaza. They said that the family had spent a lot of money on the expenses of the trial and also the burial, and you remember the exhumation, the high-profile exhumation that was much publicized by the media. These are some of the reasons that the two lawyers were trying to argue from either side, and this could have prompted why Martin Muya, the High Court judge, postponed this case to be determined Monday, Michelle.
All right, now, Francis, the two have, of course, argued as to why they should not be held culpable for this. But what are the police there saying? Are they holding these two to account on what they did?
Well, of course, this case is all about trying to hold account the two police officers, what transpired. There is, of course, public outrage on the developments of the 22nd day of August 2014 when this happened. There is a lot of public outrage, and this case is trying really to determine which way justice is going to take. Well, something very important to note is the fact that You remember that when Kwekwe Mwandaza was killed, he was buried actually the next day, and this was all, according to the court, it was all a scheme of trying to conceal important information that could have prosecuted this particular case. A second post-mortem had to be conducted, and this was petitioned by the family, and it occasioned the exhumation of the body of Kwekwe Mwandaza. And actually, it was determined later on that Kwekwe Mwandaza, by a high-velocity bullet that could have come from a G3 or an AK-47. Of course, contrary to claims earlier that she had died through a pistol, meaning that it was close range. Of course, trying to cement the fact that they wanted to paint the girl as a visual attacker who wanted to attack the police. Well, these are some of the things that many have questioned. The court has already put to test some of these arguments, and Monday, the fate of which way the two police officers will be sentenced will be known by then Monday.
All right, thank you very much, Francis Ontoma there from Mombasa. We'll be keeping you up to date with that story in our subsequent bulletins. Now, the International Criminal Court Appeals Chamber will this evening deliver a landmark ruling in regard to the case facing Deputy President William Ruto and journalist Joshua Arap Sang. This is on the application of Rule 68 on the use of recanted evidence, and as Sam Mugina now reports, today could mark a turning point in the case depending on the ruling.
The quantity, look at the quantum, and don't look at reliability. And we say, in part, that's informed by an appreciation by the prosecution that they are insignificant and obvious difficulties when it comes to the foundations of their case.
Our faith in the Rome Statute system, which had been jolted, can only be reinforced if these negotiations' outcomes receive judicial imprimatur in court.
The integrity of the court's proceedings continues to be challenged. Matters that are either sub judice or have already been adjudicated must not be determined or undermined by virtue of discussions and decisions of states parties.
Tutatumia sheria, tutatumia siasa, tutatumia maombi ili hiyo kesi isambaratike.
Kwa sababu tuliamini ya kwanza kwamba kesi ingekuwa ya justice. Lakini wakati walisema ya kwamba kesi watalazimisha, tumesimama kusema la.
All right, now that is the landmark ruling that will be given today by the International Criminal Court. But let's take a look at just what Rule 68 is, and this is what is in contention at the ICC. And Rule 68 is one of the ICC rules and procedures of evidence, and it refers specifically to the prior use of recorded testimony or the introduction of previous recanted testimony of witnesses. Now, in the case facing Deputy President William Ruto, let's just take a look at how the issue of recanted evidence comes into play. Now, the prosecution at the beginning of this case initially had 29 witnesses, and the last witness, however, refused to testify. But out of these 29 witnesses, 9 of them did not take the stand, and so that left 20 more witnesses, 19 actually, with one refusing to testify. Now, of those who testified, they were declared hostile after recanting their initial statements. Now, out of those who did take the stand, a specific 5 of them who had initially given evidence, putting Deputy President William Ruto at the core of planning meetings ahead of the 2007-2008 post-election violence. And the main agenda of these meetings, according to that evidence that was given prior, was to buy weapons that would be used in the post-election violence. But after a while, these witnesses came back and recanted their evidence. So Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda said that the witnesses had been corrupt and had to come back and recant their evidence. Allegations that Fatou Bensouda is now putting on Deputy President William Ruto. Now, Fatou Bensouda alleged that the interference from the government took place in the recanting of the evidence by these 5 specific witnesses, and so she asked for permission to use these recanted evidence, and that's where Rule 68 comes in. She wants to invoke that, but Ruto and Sang appealed the decision by the trial chamber. Now, of course, Ruto and his lawyer Karim Khan went ahead to appeal that information. But let's move on just to see why does the court want to use Rule 68 of recanted evidence, and has the court used this rule before? Now, there was a Lubanga case in December 2010. Lubanga is a Congolese warlord, was charged on several crimes, I beg your pardon, including ethnic deaths in the country. Now, Lubanga was the first case to be referred to the ICC and The Hague earlier in 2006. But on December 13th, 2010, the use of Rule 68, the court admitted a prior testimony of 2 witnesses to further convict the case against Lubanga. There had been several appeals by Lubanga and his defense case, arguing that the prosecution did not have the right evidence. There was no information of where the prosecution got their evidence. The prosecution allegedly saying that they retrieved the evidence from the United Nations. Now, Lubanga's defense team, I beg your pardon, went ahead and appealed these cases, saying that Lubanga should be let free because of failure of evidence in the case. But in March 2012, Lubanga was eventually convicted after the court allowed the use of prior recanted testimony. So as we see, this has been used before. Lubanga was accused of recruiting and using child soldiers, many of them under the age of 15 years. And in March 2012, he was convicted and is now serving a 14-year sentence at the ICC. So these are the proceedings so far. But let's just take a look at what will be at play when this rule is used against Deputy President William Ruto. And we now want to speak to Tom Onditi of the International Justice Monitor, just to give us a breakdown of what this will mean for the country right after the break.